It's not always obvious how we quietly sabotage our lives. And you probably feel it too, that there are some hidden patterns that you wrestle with. Now, of course, no one in his right mind would consciously choose to harm himself. But that's what ends up happening when we push ourselves beyond what's healthy and ignore the signs that things aren't okay. Otherwise, how would you explain that we stay in toxic relationships, we overwork, we're in pain and act like it doesn't matter, and still believe we have no other choice than coping and struggling with our daily responsibilities? That's because we believe that vulnerability is a luxury we have to earn, and we mistake all of this for resilience, for strength, until our body or mind forces us to stop. And in those moments where you have to confront the fact that you've neglected yourself, you realize that you kept pushing your mental health or your physical integrity aside by prioritizing all the rest. And it makes you wonder, how did we become so good at suppressing? How did we become so good at making discomfort feel so normal to the point that we fail to notice when it crossed the line into turning harmful? And if you just paused for a second, you would probably feel it, this weight that you carry silently. But since we don't make the time or find any healthy way to release the tensions we accumulate over time, or even notice how our old wounds play out in our day-to-day, well, we just keep going. And it's pretty ironic, really, because if someone you cared about was sick, you would actually tell them to go get checked. But we don't give ourselves the same grace or level of care. And so naturally, the path forward is actually inward. So I'd like you to ask yourself, can I make the difference between accepting a situation and forcing myself to accept it? Between being at ease with what happens to me and forcing myself to think that it's okay because I have to carry on and I don't want to admit that I'm actually suffering. You know, when you grow up without emotional safety, with a parent who doesn't acknowledge how you feel, who's dismissive, whose focus is on more important things like your academic results, who tell you that you should look on the bright side because your other basic needs were met, and who didn't give you the space you needed to get in touch with yourself, with your emotions, then it teaches you to downplay your pain, to stay silent. And in general, if your feelings were brushed aside or even used against you, you learn to repress. You learn to survive the discomfort instead of addressing it. But here's the thing. Repressed emotions don't just disappear. They still carry an unresolved energy that finds other ways to surface. They become unchecked anxiety, gradual burnout, addictive and coping behaviors. And it makes sense, right? When you're carrying this pain quietly, it's hard to sit with yourself, to sit with that discomfort without reaching for bubbles of comfort. And so the next question is, do you find relief in habits that you know aren't serving you? Like hours numbing yourself out with videos, stress eating, overworking, drinking, smoking, popping pills. And the worst part is, it doesn't have to look bad from your perspective, because very often it's just so trivialized. And a part of us knows, it simply knows that we're escaping from feelings we don't want to face. And when those habits become a necessity to feel good again, that's when you're no longer in control. That's when we rely on coping behaviors that numb us just enough to function, but not enough to sound the alarm. That's what makes them so insidious. They simply rob us of the ability to confront and process what's really going on. And Dr. Gabor Mate said it best.
All the practices of addiction, whether they involve substances or not, are actually attempted as escapes from emotional pain, from discomfort, from suffering of some kind.
So whatever you're drawn to, the addiction itself is just a symptom. It's a signal pointing to the unresolved pain that you're carrying. Now, the problem with these patterns is how they affect your self-esteem and extend to how others see you. That's the reason why people stay in relationships far too long, bending over backwards for others' approval and trying so hard to give while feeling empty. You would think that if you could be perfect, then maybe you would earn their approval. But when your peace of mind depends on someone else's mood, you lose yourself. Because when you disconnect from your inner world, you stop recognizing what truly drives your behaviors and fail to realize how you guilt trip yourself for other people's lack of emotional regulation. This means that you push yourself to do more when your partner is cold, dismissive, distant, or critical, because you're trying to get them to show appreciation once again to feel okay. And that's why people pleasers stay too long in relationships that aren't right for them, but you have to figure out where those patterns started. And chances are, when we grow up being met with disappointment instead of encouragement, with being compared to others, witnessing closed off body language when we didn't measure up, then that's when we shape our lives around avoiding rejection instead of pursuing what truly fulfills us. To break out of this cycle, you first have to realize where it came from. So this trifecta, so to speak, of neglecting your needs, escaping into numbing behaviors, and relying on external validation, it doesn't just exhaust you. It sets you up for even more disappointment. You work so hard, you try so much, you pour yourself into your relationships, you go the extra mile at work, and it still feels like it's never enough. And because these patterns lack assertiveness, boundaries, or self-care, they rarely lead to the outcomes you hope for. But you still think that the problem must be you. Whenever something doesn't work out, you double down. You set more goals. You push harder. You tell yourself that if you just kept going, things would finally turn around. But that mindset comes with a trap, because it keeps you constantly focused on what's missing, on the life that you don't yet have. And that gap becomes your entire experience. You stop seeing what's in front of you, only to constantly experience that lack in the background. So you cling on to hope to avoid facing the reality of your situation. In fact, this mindset does something dangerous. First, it blinds you to the fact that your circumstances might not change. Not because you're not trying, but because they're not meant to. So you keep trying to fix what's essentially broken, thinking that effort alone will be enough, and that's what eventually exhausts you or leads you to profound resentment. Second, every failed attempt doesn't just test your patience, it chips away at your confidence. So instead of challenging the story you live by, you eventually stop believing in yourself. And that creates a vicious cycle where you try even harder to prove your worth. Something cracks open when people finally realize just how long they've been hurting, how long they've been telling themselves that they were fine. But that's exactly where healing begins. The moment you face your pain, instead of repressing it, you start to see how it arises. You start to notice the patterns you no longer want to repeat. And once you start to listen, not to others, but to yourself, to your pain, you realize that it's not something to suppress or endure. It's more of a messenger, a signal that calls you to reconsider how you respond to your circumstances. And sure, you can't always control what happens to you or what triggers you on the spot, but you can control how you respond to it. You can change your behaviors. You can shift your perspective. You can start making choices that serve your well-being, not just your responsibilities. You stop trying to fix everything or please everyone. Now, I could give you dozens of tools to help you make this kind of cognitive shift, but personally, there are two powerful things that I find most helpful. First, you're always one thought away from feeling better or from acting in a way that serves you. The thing is that simple truth holds up no matter how loud your self-defeating thoughts might get. And second, when you're struggling, you always want to ask yourself this. If someone you loved were in your position, what would you tell them? That one question often makes us realize just how harsh and critical we are with ourselves in ways we would never be with those we care for. And it opens the door to something we need to practice more, and that's self-compassion. But at the end of the day, in the face of suffering, we usually do one of two things. We either blame our circumstances or we turn inward and repress what we feel or bottle it up. But the only real path forward is to be liberated, to be free from the constant pull of anxiety, shame, and guilt, from all the invisible forces that rob you of the clarity to do your best while also caring for yourself. Because self-neglect is not strength, and looking after yourself is not selfish. It's not a luxury, it's an obligation, especially if you were taught to put others first at all costs. So figure out what you're silencing, explore what's still hiding in your blind spots that keep your heart from healing, and the moment you give yourself permission to feel what you've buried, then you'll be on your way to open the floodgates. And from that space, you can start creating a new path for yourself and build a life that truly honors who you are. I'd love to hear from you if this message resonated with you, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if this spoke to you, I'll be sharing more reflections to help you along this path. So I hope to see you again soon.